Yes, sir, I am in Boston.
I think I lost your phone call. I was in the bathroom.
It's okay. All right, so here we go. Let me just click this button and off we go. Thanks for joining me, everyone. Charles Moscowitz here, Monday through Friday, 12 to 2 p.m. in this case, as I do this program live. And my guest is Ralph Griffith. He is the author of Madoff An Unholy Alliance. Ralph, thanks for joining me today.
Glad to be here.
So you began writing while entering federal prison for the first time 14 years ago, and while you were in prison, you were served time with Bernie Madoff and Jonathan Pollard in Butner, North Carolina. Talk a little bit about your situation there and what you learned.
Well, as I said, I started writing probably 7 years before I even was transferred to Butner. Butner is the Federal Bureau of Prisons. If you have any chronic medical conditions, they are now putting everybody in a certain place. Butner actually has 5 different institutions. Bernie and I were in a small, probably the smallest one.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't a hospital per se, but we're about 1 mile from the federal hospital. And Bernie and I both had heart conditions, and that's why we were designated there. I spent my last 7 years there with Bernie. While I was there, I worked as a law clerk, so it was kind of a central location. Everybody kind of came through where I was at. And it wasn't just Bernie. There were a lot of, I guess for a better word, notorious, well-known criminals there.
Yeah.
We had a couple mafia dons, Carmine Persico, who died a while back, and Nicky Scarpo from Atlantic City and Philly, Pollard, and I could go on. But I think what you would be interested in more is my relationship with Madoff. And
well, yes, you've got so many interesting books. I mean, I'd like to talk to you about any one of them. And you're a prolific writer, and I think it's particularly interesting that you were on the inside for that time and got to know some of these people from someone who is like you, a writer, and somebody who kind of tries to think about people, personality, and who people are and what makes them tick, because that's what writers do. So you have a great front seat view of some of these situations, and you must have learned, so much, even including things maybe you haven't yet written about.
The thing that I'm constantly amazed is that a lot of things that we take as fictional is really not fiction, and things that we take as nonfiction, allegedly, is fiction.
Right. No, that's a fantastic insight. And let's talk a bit about Madoff. Right now, he is in hospice. He's 80 years old. He's not in good health. And I guess that my first question is, how did he adjust to prison? I mean, I would think that somebody who had been living so high off the hog for so many years, if not decades, traveling in the highest circles, and yet somebody who probably in the back of his mind knew that he would end up at some point in prison because he was sitting on top of this enormous criminal enterprise that he was fully conscious of what he was doing. Was he like, I mean, I'd imagine he might have even been a little relieved because it was kind of the final, moment of truth that he finally, the pressure of living that lie was off his back. What was he like in prison? I mean, did he adjust to it?
The thing about Madoff is, and I've known thousands and thousands of people, and some people, not at the level of Madoff, but people that were successful out there. And I was completely amazed at how well Madoff kept things to himself. He did not whine. He did not complain. He didn't brag. None of that. He was very quiet and circumspect, and he was probably felt trapped in regards to there's not a lot of people. Imagine Bernie Madoff, and there's a Mexican gang around him with these inmates with tattoos all over their faces and heads, and what he would be thinking as far as he really couldn't have a conversation with a whole lot of people. There's probably about 10 of us that had the educational level that we could sit and communicate. And as I said, Bernie, he never complained. Getting information out of Bernie was like pulling teeth. Bernie's not religious. He doesn't go to Shabbat on Friday night. He doesn't, a few, Passover he signs up for, but there was about 5 Jewish inmates there, and they were all fairly intellectual. And you would have thought they would have been a tight-knit group or friendly, but they actually hated each other. And it was like, I never saw anything. You think you're just 5 people and you can't get along,
That's actually not, not to get into a stereotype, but that's not atypical of Jewish men in particular.
Yes, they say if you put 2 Jews in a room, they'll have 23 different points of view.
That's right. There'll be 3 synagogues. So you and yet you're a writer, and you look at, you like to get to what makes people, what the truth is, what makes people tick, what people did. So you were in a position to learn a lot more about Bernie Madoff than anybody probably alive today. And you saw him in a sense in his most unguarded, even though he was guarded, because that's probably how he lived all those years, keeping the cards as close to the vest as possible, and he was concerned about personal safety. But given all of those factors, what did you learn about his criminal enterprise and its connection to, the most powerful elements of Wall Street and the power elites?
Bernie had a 48-year run. He started this company in 1960, right out of college. Regardless of how he ended up, he still had a hell of a run out there. He was 70 when he was convicted.
Wow.
I didn't look at Madoff as a failure. On the contrary, he was rich in information if you knew how to ask the right questions. The thing that allowed him to do what he did was the fact of, we have this concept in America that even though there might be a few bad apples in government or a few bad apples on Wall Street, that basically the overall structure of the American government, American business, is legitimate and pretty good.
Yeah.
And what I learned from Bernie was that the government is completely corrupt, state, local, federal, has been, always will be. And it's a pay-to-play game in this country. Bernie was part of the financial services industry as a market maker, but he's part of, there's more than just market makers in banking, investment, houses, brokerages. This industry has over 165 trillion in assets. They have lobbyists, special committees that work out of Washington, all right, that influence not only who's going to be running these government agencies, they set policy. The average citizen has no say whatsoever against $165 trillion. Now, Bernie was an individual that the SEC would go to for advice.
Incredible, yeah.
He was chairman of the NASDAQ and he likes to claim that he invented was one of the co-founders of NASDAQ. He wasn't really, but he had, when he first started his company, what his whole thing was is the New York Stock Exchange. They used to get on the floor and trade. And Bernie came up with doing it electronically, okay? And it was quicker to execute. And then he learned about how they get into when you place an order with your broker, that broker may choose a market maker that gives him so much commission per trade, per share. And it's made the order flow. And it's really, he kind of worked his way up. He had a good reputation. He would go to the big political fundraisers. You know, rich people, they love to, Bernie taught me that wealthy people feel guilty. A lot of them, a lot of people that have wealth in this country did not earn it or work for it. They inherited that wealth.
Right.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So they have this collective guilt, and they love to have benefits and charity balls, and Bernie would be there. You know, he'd write a check, you know, maybe he wrote a check for $400,000 for charity, but he might make 20 or $40 million in business at that same dinner, that soiree, you know, at the Ritz.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it was kind of a part of a broad con game, in that he would create this air of legitimacy by appearing and knowing how to talk the talk and walk the walk of these very powerful, well-heeled people, and knew how to circulate among their circles. And then he would build confidence by writing a big check like that. And I mean, that's how the classic pyramid scheme. People would see that and they would be like, wow. And everybody would, where do I sign up? You know, this is somebody that's obviously very successful. We all know him. We all like him. You know, he appears to be a well-heeled fellow. You know, it's part of this whole, you know, it's kind of like a cultural thing. He knew how to operate inside those circles, and he knew how to do it seamlessly.
Bernie also, as I said, and people don't change. In other words, the way you are where you live right now is the way you would be if you came to prison.
Right.
I act the same way in prison than I do out here. Bernie's the same thing. Bernie didn't come to prison and decide he was going to act like a gangbanger or
right.
He was Bernie Madoff inside. He'd been Bernie Madoff all his life. So the Bernie that he exhibited in Butner was the same Bernie that he exhibited out there. And as I said, you know, I had a book, my first book out was called Monkey House. It was more of a satire on my memoir of there with Madoff and everybody. And I had Bernie's 10 Commandments. Mm-hmm. And Bernie was emphatic about, you never express your opinion about politics or religion because you may offend somebody unwittingly. So you don't do that. You know, he was as innocuous as you could imagine. He'd never make a comment out loud watching TV. And, you know, some people will sit there and they'll make a comment, Dad, you know, that's not Madoff. You know, thought he was a speed reader, watching him go through the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, and really quick. And then finally I realized, you know, he wasn't reading fast. He was just looking for articles written about him. Yeah. Like the time I saw a picture of De Niro, who was going to play in a movie about Madoff. Mm-hmm. De Niro, his hair and everything, he looked remarkable. He looked very similar to Madoff, and I could see him playing the role. So I said to Bernie, I said, I saw a picture of De Niro the other day, and I couldn't tell who looked more like who, you or him. And he says, he fucking looks like me.
No, the one movie I did see about him was the one with Richard Dreyfuss. Did he like that one?
I did.
He did a pretty good job.
He said it was full. You know, even the movie that De Niro made, the woman that wrote his so-called autobiography, I mean, she probably visited a couple times with Bernie in the visiting room for a couple hours, wrote some letters, had some phone calls. Knowing Bernie, like he gave her the old PR routine, you know, it was always a presentation. Like the first really deep conversation for about an hour and a half that I had with Bernie, I felt like I was a TV talk show host, and he was practicing his monologue of me. And because it was all pre-recorded. He wasn't spontaneous, you know, he had memorized what he was going to say. You know, we talked about his son committing suicide and, you know, whether if the 2008 real estate bubble hadn't happened, would he still be in business? Because, you know, that's what really forced his hand. You know, as long as everything's booming, you can get away with a lot. But when everything started rocking and people wanted to get their money because they were paranoid, and
it blew down the whole house of cards.
He claimed that he had investors in Singapore. He could have still kept going. You know, at that time he was just tired of it. You know, and he probably was. There was a lot of pressure, as you said. You know, intense pressure, especially the last couple of years. And there is a relief for a moment. Until your new reality pops in. You know, I'm here, and
that's right.
I know Bernie had planned on, after 10 years, his lawyers told him that he would probably get a compassionate release. And even with the COVID, they did not do that.
I think he was looking for a pardon from President Trump. Didn't happen.
No. And it just would be political dynamite, you know.
No, because well, he hurt a lot of people. I mean, you know, I don't know, did he have any sense of remorse for that, or is it just all numbers?
No, I wouldn't say he has remorse about any of that. But he uses the attitude, and not just him, a lot of people use a little philosophy that goes like, what I did was bad, but compared to what's going on every day,
that's the classic, you know, the classic dodge. I mean, anyone who commits a crime does that. They have to in order to be there. A murderer. I mean, I heard an interview with a mafia hitman who said this. You know, he felt that somehow by taking somebody down, I mean, it was in his mind, he had a rationale, like a justification for it, that this was necessary. That there's like a trapeze act in the brain that does something. I mean, in a sense, in a mild sense, we all do this. You know, everybody, you know, sometimes rationalizes certain things that they know aren't exactly, you know, up and up. And in a way, it strikes me that he was the classic consummate politician. As you say, he learned how to say nothing and say it beautifully.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, I remember once Clinton's Secretary of Health and Human Services, Donna Shalala, made this comment when they asked what it was like to be on, you know, a politician. You say nothing and you do it beautifully. You know, you don't offend anybody. You know, you have somebody whispering in your ear, don't say this, don't say that. You don't want to offend this group or that group. And that way, everybody thinks you're their friend. Everybody thinks you're one of them. It's like this complete transparent person. And I think he obviously learned how to do that to a high degree. And so he could travel in any circle and people would just say, oh yeah, sure, Bernie Madoff, you know, he's one of our guys, you know, and nobody would really know who he was. It was all very much, you know, an external, a manufactured sort of a thing. I mean, according to the movies, that even includes his own wife and sons didn't really know what he was doing.
You know, there is one difference, a major difference between Bernie Madoff and politicians. Bernie and I, we spoke about this in detail, that the average politician is basically a frustrated movie actor or rock star. They would have rather have been a rock star, you know, a Mick Jagger. They would have rather have been a movie star, a Brad Pitt, but they didn't have the talent to do that. And so the third, thing for fame and being on TV every day was to be a politician.
Sure.
Because, I mean, if you really talk to college kids and say, what are you planning on doing for a profession or for the rest of your life? Oh, I want to be a politician. That's like saying, I want to be a drug dealer. I want to be a pimp. I want to be a politician. I want to fuck people over and make a lot of money, by, favoring the corruption that's going on here. Whereas with Bernie, he was not seeking fame, and most people didn't know who Bernie Madoff was, the average public, until his debacle, and he was unknown other than just to the select few in Washington and in New York and London. He did half his business in Europe. He had a beautiful office in Mayfair over in the West End, and he had a private jet, flew back every week. He flew to London, and he made half his money there. And I was doing a little research. People were kind of upset about Chase Manhattan, about being in collusion with Bernie. And if you, I did a lot of research. I do research for my books, and I've turned into a pretty good investigative journalist. And I went back all the way to J.P. Morgan, and reading the business history of Chase Manhattan is like reading the dossier on a career criminal. I mean, they go back for the last 50 years. They've been busted for every kind of criminal, money laundering, corruption that you can think of. Only they are too big to prosecute. So what they do with them, right, is they fine them a couple billion, and they don't have to admit to any wrongdoing. That's the little routine. And I think when you ask me, how did Bernie feel regret? Bernie feels like, hey, Chase has been doing what I've been doing, only they've been doing it for a longer and a grander scale. They're just too big to prosecute. So they got a little guy like me. I'm a political, as he called, I think he said one time in an interview, he said, the press is using me as a giant piñata, for this, put the blame for the 2008 financial crisis, which Bernie had nothing to do with. Bernie was not responsible for that. Washington, D.C. and Wall Street was responsible for that.
And there were a lot of people who, as you said, they were too big to fail, and they walked away like the head of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. They both were able to jump out with this enormous multi-billion-dollar parachute while the company went burned and to the ground, and everybody lost all their equity. So, it's interesting. I could see where he kind of saw it that way. He understood the inside of how corrupt the system is. And, you talk about the corruption of Chase Manhattan Bank. I mean, this goes back. I mean, this is human nature. It goes back in American history. We could look at the big mainline families of America, the Cabots and the Forbes, and they all made their money from opium trade in China. So, I mean, it's not new. This is, how people made their beans, I suppose, right?
Yeah. And, here again, it's not an excuse.
Right. No, it's not, but
it's a rationale that I think a lot of people use, and
why didn't he just take off? Why did he allow himself? I mean, you said that he had business interests all over the world. He was doing business in Europe and in Singapore. Why did he allow himself to be taken in?
Well, Mark Rich was able, because of a tax issue.
Yeah.
Mark Rich was able to get protection in Switzerland. Madoff
got a pardon from Bill Clinton. That helped too.
Yeah. They would have been able to go. Bernie wouldn't have been safe anywhere, other than perhaps Russia. And he probably didn't. The thought of being there, probably that would have been about the only place he could have gone, And when you get that much notoriety and that big of a thing, he's not going to go anywhere. Can't go to the UK, EU. They're going to give him right back to the United States. So, just it was up, and
So the jig is up, and he took the hit.
Yep. And he didn't try to put it. He tried to protect his family as much as he could. I don't know if you've ever been married.
I am married. Yeah.
I've been married a long time, and I have to tell you, I don't believe that Ruth could have lived that long with him, not have an inkling of what was up.
Oh no, I find that a little tough to believe as well.
Yeah.
Maybe the sons didn't know, but they seem to be kind of straight arrows. I mean, in terms of being in business. I mean, and it is their father, so maybe they didn't really see it.
Well, he had a Charles, he had a legitimate business. He had the market making division of his company. He was the sixth largest market maker in the United States. Over $1 trillion a year in trades passed through his company. He had 240 employees and 3 floors there on Madison Avenue. So it's quite conceivable that his sons managing that aspect, that division of the company, didn't have time to wonder what he was doing in his private investments. Actually, wasn't until a couple of years earlier that he finally was forced to register as a hedge fund, even though he had it was the largest hedge fund in the world, and hedge funds don't have the same. People say, why didn't the SEC know about Madoff? Well, they don't regulate hedge funds.
Right, they're private banks. I mean, they're merchant banks. In a way, they operate the same way some like BlackRock operates.
Sure.
They do. They're private. A lot of them are private banking families, and they're very secretive. And they don't do. And Bernie Madoff seems to fit that mold. He did not want public attention. He wanted to keep things under the wire. He kept out of the limelight. Never gave interviews. Didn't appear publicly, but he'd go to these parties, of course, but he didn't seek interviews. He didn't seek to be on television.
No.
He a low profile.
Exactly. Because real money doesn't seek publicity like that.
Yes.
That's the frustrated personality of a politician that wants to be.
I think that's a great example. And they're such narcissists that they just they're willing to sell anything, including their soul, in order to get the reporter and the FaceTime. I mean, that's why they're, in a way, it's the corrupting influence. I got a firsthand glimpse of this when I ran for office. I saw people like that you would not have thought would have been like that, who are they become obsessed with their own image to the point where they'll do anything to keep that going. They think they get a grandiose sense of importance that where they lose their moorings.
A good example right now is what's going on with New York's governor Cuomo.
Oh God, yeah. I mean,
that's a Texas class book example of what I'm talking about. California's got the same problem with their Governor Newsom.
And you wrote a book about Cuomo, by the way.
I did.
He seems to be somebody who just was so privileged and so. The media was lavishing him for so many decades as this brilliant new.
Well, get this. I did write a book about him, and last winter, and I discovered when I tried to market my book and advertise with the big media companies, they wouldn't take any ads. They said, "This is too sensitive.
Yeah,
we're not going to advertise this book." And I'm thinking, oh, this is before the stuff really jumped out. I mean, because I linked it all up. I didn't make anything up. The same week that he told the nursing homes they had to accept COVID positive patients, they passed a bill in Albany to give blanket immunity to all the people in that industry so they couldn't be sued. Total liability.
What is the deal? What is the deal with that, Ralph? I mean, he sends out a directive ordering hospitals to put COVID-19 active people in nursing homes. And this was at a time when there was the naval ship off the coast in Manhattan, sitting there with 3,000 empty beds. And he actually put out a directive telling hospitals not to send people. I mean, did he think he was going to make Trump look bad? I mean, what's the deal with that?
Part of that, he, as I said, he was on TV every day. He had
Yeah.
I guess he probably felt like Seinfeld, he had his own, or The Sopranos or whatever. He had his own show, and hell, what drove me to writing the book on him
Yeah.
was his Emmy. And I watched him, I watched De Niro and Billy Crystal and everybody just kissing his ass and, oh, you're the man, you're so great. And I got so irritated, right, that I started doing investigation. I even got in my book, the names of all the different companies that were contributing. He's got over 100 million in campaign contributions. And I linked all the people that he gave immunity to for the COVID thing are some of his biggest campaign contributors. So, I connected the dots. It's all there, the guy, that's why the book's called Award for Mass Murder, only in America.
Exactly.
You get an Emmy for killing over 10,000 people. In Nuremberg, they tried people like that.
I'm surprised they don't pull him out of that house and have him lynched. Elderly people especially, the people's mothers and fathers.
And yet, what do they focus on? They want to focus on, he made some inappropriate comments to some young female staff members.
Well, I think that's a great dodge to take.
Yes. We're not going to address what the guy really did. What we're going to do is talk about, he put his hands on some woman's ass, and that is a crime. No, killing 10,000 people, someone's grandmother, their fathers, their mothers, that are totally defenseless, and then giving blanket immunity from financial liability to the people that did this, conspired with him, is, it's a lot, as the Jews say, it's a lot of chutzpah.
Oh my God! To put it mildly. So, but Ralph, talk a little bit, if you don't mind, about your life in prison. How did the prisons deal with the COVID virus, by the way? And I imagine that there's not a lot of sympathy for prisoners, but what was going on there with that, do you think?
Well, I'm actually out right now because of COVID.
Okay.
I have been since last July, and I'm still scheduled to have a court hearing. But I keep abreast by going to the government's website, and it's bop.gov, and it gives you a status on COVID. And apparently about 50% that they're admitting to, 50% of the entire population is tested positive for COVID in the BOP. That would be, I said, there's over 50,000, and their population's been reduced now. They've had 220 deaths, mostly from older people, from institutions like in Butner. There's one institution there, I wasn't there, and Bernie's not there, but it was a low facility there, and they had a lot of senior citizens there in open dorms. Mm-hmm. So guess what? They had a high death count there.
Yeah, right.
They couldn't isolate anybody. But I hear now they're vaccinating as many inmates.
Okay, well, that's good news.
But a lot of places were a little slow about that. It's kind of hard to have any social distancing inside a jail setting.
I guess I would imagine.
You got 50 men in a room the size of your living room, concrete, and screaming and yelling.
Right. That's it.
You're hit.
Somebody has it, then you're going to get it. Well, look, you've got some great insights on the inside of politics and culture. That's for sure, and power. And I really I appreciate you joining me. Let my listeners and viewers know where they can get your excellent book, and I'd like to have you back to talk further at another time.
Okay. As far as my books, I'm on Apple iTunes, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Google Play for books, and Kobo, Walmart. So I'm pretty much available, and I keep my prices, my ebook prices reasonable. Paperback books prices aren't too bad. Or you can simply Google me, Ralph Griffith, and I own that name. There's no other Ralph Griffiths up there now. So you can Google or Bing or whatever search engine, or ralphgriffith.net, and which is my official website. And I appreciate being on your show, and I look forward to continuing this. There's so much information that I have for you. It's kind of hard to cover it in just one show. So maybe a series of shows.
I'd like to do a series with you. I really appreciate meeting you, and you've got some great resources. I hope everything is good for you, and that you're in good health, and that you be careful and everything. I mean, just be very well and be well.
And I apologize for being late.
No problem.
I'm on the West Coast here, and I had penciled. I had 12 and then 9, and then all of a sudden I realized, oh my God.
No. It happens to be all the time.
3 hours difference.
No problem.
I talk to people in London, they're 8 hours or 9 hours ahead of me. So
yeah, exactly. It's hard to keep track. All right. So Ralph, listen, again, thanks so much. And I'll talk to you soon.